The rent notice glowed softly on the cracked wall panel, its alien symbols pulsing in patient indifference. And Marcus Hale stared at it the way a drowning man stared at the surface of the sea. Close enough to see, far enough to never touch. He counted his credits again, even though he already knew the number. A habit born from desperation rather than hope. 3 small chips and a ration voucher. Not enough to buy passage off the station, not enough to eat properly, and definitely not enough to pay rent. The station around him hummed with life. Alien footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Claws on metal, soft pads on synthetic stone. Voices in languages he barely understood. But inside the tiny room everything felt still, suspended, as if time itself was waiting for the inevitable knock. Marcus had been a soldier once, not the kind celebrated in recruitment posters, but the kind sent into smoke and silence, the kind ordered to hold lines that command already considered lost. His uniform long gone, his service record buried under sealed files and forgotten wars. Now he was just another human refugee on the edge of alien space. Another survivor clinging to dignity with empty hands. The door chimed, a low melodic sound that vibrated through the walls, and Marcus's chest tightened. He opened it slowly. She stood there taller than him by half a head, her skin a deep shade of luminous blue that caught the corridor lights like polished stone. Silver markings traced along her cheekbones and down her neck, symbols of status he did not recognize but instinctively respected. Her eyes were gold, not harsh, but heavy, weighed down by something old and unsaid. The alien landlady. Her name was Celira. He knew that much. Everyone on the station did. She owned half the residential ring and ruled it with quiet authority rather than fear. No guards at her side. No raised voice, just presence. Marcus swallowed and stepped aside. The gesture automatic from years of military discipline. "I know why you're here," he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "I don't have the credits yet." Celira's gaze moved past him, taking in the bare room, the folded blanket, the military boots worn thin at the soles, the ration wrappers carefully stacked instead of discarded. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You said the same thing last cycle," she replied, her voice smooth but edged with iron, translated through the station's ambient field. "Galactic law is patient human, but it is not kind." The word human carried no insult, only distance. Marcus nodded, heat creeping up his neck, shame heavier than any accusation. "I'll work. Anything. Docks. Cleaning crews. Security rotations. I've applied everywhere." "I know," she said, and that surprised him. She stepped fully into the room without asking permission, her long coat brushing the doorway, and for a moment the space felt even smaller, filled with her presence and the faint scent of alien spices and cold starlight. "Then you know I'm trying," Marcus added, quieter now. "I'm not asking for mercy, just time." Celira turned to face him, her golden eyes searching his face as if looking past skin and bone, into memory, into intent, and something flickered there, recognition perhaps, or caution. "Time," she echoed, "is a resource more valuable than credits." Outside, a distant tremor rolled through the station, subtle enough that most residents would ignore it. But Marcus felt it instantly, muscles tightening, instincts long dormant snapping awake. His eyes darted toward the ceiling, toward the direction of the docking rings. Celira noticed. "You felt that," she said, not a question. "Docking disturbance," Marcus replied automatically. "Heavy mass arrival, military grade." Her posture stiffened just a fraction, the calm surface cracking. "No warships are scheduled," she said, her voice lower now. Marcus exhaled slowly. A soldier's breath, controlled, grounding. Then someone's lying. Another tremor followed, stronger this time. The lights flickered, and through the corridor view poured outside. A faint shadow slid across the station's glow, vast and unmistakable. A warship. Celira's hands curled at her sides, her composure faltering for the first time. And Marcus saw it then. Not a landlady, not a property holder, but a woman carrying weight she never asked for. "Galactic law," she murmured, almost to herself, "has found us." Marcus met her gaze, fear coiling in his chest but something else rising with it, purpose old and dangerous. "If they're here for you," he said, They won't care that I owe rent. She looked at him sharply. They will, she said. Because by law, any resident under my domain becomes my responsibility, my burden, my leverage. The word leverage sent a chill through him. Before he could respond, the station alarms began to sound, not loud, not panicked, but ceremonial, the kind used when authority arrived, when fate changed course. Celira straightened, every inch of her suddenly regal, the silver markings along her skin glowing faintly. You should leave, she said. Now. Marcus didn't move. He thought of the battlefield dust, of brothers left behind, of promises broken by command, and of this woman standing alone against something vast and merciless. I'm not running, he said quietly. Not again. Celira stared at him, surprise breaking through her controlled exterior. And for a heartbeat, destiny shifted, unseen but undeniable. Far beyond the station walls, the warship completed its docking alignment, its hull marked with the sigils of authority and judgment. And somewhere deep within its core, a decision waited to be enforced. Neither of them knew yet that this moment, born from unpaid rent and quiet defiance, would ignite a battle written long before either of them were born. A collision of law and fate, and a rescue that would echo across the stars. The alarms faded into a low ceremonial hum, the kind designed to command obedience rather than fear. And Marcus felt the station shift beneath his boots as docking clamps locked into place, metal answering metal with the finality of a judge's gavel. Celira moved first, crossing the room with controlled urgency, her coat flaring slightly as she activated the wall panel. Alien glyphs blooming into the air like cold fire. They will send envoys, she said, her voice steady but tight. They always do. Law prefers witnesses. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes never leaving the ceiling as if he could see through layers of alloy and vacuum. Witnesses mean declarations, he replied, and declarations mean sentences. She paused, her fingers hovering over the glowing symbols, then glanced back at him. You speak like someone who has stood before tribunals. I have, Marcus said, the words tasting old. Military courts, command reviews, inquiries that already knew the answer before I walked in. Celira studied him more closely now, as if the warship's arrival had peeled away a layer she hadn't bothered to look beneath before. His posture, the way his weight balanced, the stillness that came from discipline rather than fear. You were a soldier, she said, not guessing. Was, he corrected gently. The galaxy moved on. So did I, she replied, softer than intended. And for a moment silence filled the room again, thick with things neither of them said. The door chimed, deeper this time, official, resonant, and Marcus felt every nerve in his body light up. His hands itching for a weapon that wasn't there. His mind already mapping angles, exits, probabilities. Celira straightened, shoulders back, chin lifted, the landlady gone. Something else standing in her place, something older, heavier. Stand behind me, she ordered, instinctively. Marcus almost smiled, a ghost of humor flickering across his face. Not how I was trained. Before she could argue, the door slid open. Two figures entered, tall and severe, clad in black and silver armor that hummed faintly with contained energy. Their helmets mirrored, reflecting distorted versions of the room and its occupants. Between them floated a hollow sigil of galactic law, rotating slowly, endlessly. Celira of the Vathran line. One intoned, voice amplified and stripped of emotion. By authority of the Concord, we are here to assess compliance. Marcus watched their movements, precise, rehearsed soldiers too, but different, their loyalty bound to statutes rather than people. I am compliant, Celira replied, her tone calm, regal. You were not invited. Invitation is not required, the second envoy said. A claim has been filed. Marcus's jaw tightened. Claims meant debts, obligations, bloodlines, and in alien law those words carried more weight than mercy ever could. Celira's eyes flicked toward him, just for a heartbeat, then returned to the envoys. On what grounds? By law of continuity, the envoy replied. Your household remains incomplete. The words struck the room like a silent explosion. and Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Incomplete, Celira echoed, carefully. Your bond remains unfulfilled. The envoy continued. No recognized partner. No successor. Your estate falls under provisional claim. Marcus finally stepped forward, unable to stop himself. That's about property, he said. What does that have to do with me? Both helmets turned toward him in perfect unison. The human, the envoy said, and Marcus hated the way the word felt in their mouth, is registered under her domain. Celira inhaled sharply, a crack in her composure. Marcus felt the weight then, not of rent, not of survival, but of being counted, catalogued, reduced to a variable in a system that didn't care if he lived or died. Any dependent, the envoy continued, may be invoked to fulfill continuity under emergency statute. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Celira's hands trembled. Once before she clenched them into fists. You would bind a stranger to me, she said, anger burning beneath control. To satisfy law, law does not recognize strangers. The envoy replied, only assets, bonds, and outcomes. Marcus laughed then, a short, humorless sound. Figures. Celira turned to him, eyes blazing now. This is not your burden, she said fiercely. I will not have you dragged into this. He met her gaze, steady, grounded. Too late, he replied. I crossed that line the moment your warship docked. Outside, the station shuddered again. Not from docking this time, but from something else. Distant weapons charging, energy signatures flaring like warning stars. The envoys shifted subtly, their armor responding to unseen commands. Compliance window is closing. One said, declare or forfeit. Celira looked at Marcus then, truly looked at him, seeing the scars behind his eyes, the quiet resolve, the way he stood between her and danger without thinking. You don't owe me this, she whispered, the translation field barely catching it. Marcus shook his head. I owe myself. As the warship's presence pressed down on the station like gravity itself, Marcus realized this was no longer about unpaid rent or alien law. It was about choice, and once again fate had placed a weapon in his hands, not steel or fire, but a decision that would change everything. The silence that followed stretched thin and sharp, like wire pulled too tight, and Marcus could feel it cutting into him as the envoys waited, motionless, their mirrored helmets reflecting Celira's glowing markings and his own tired face back at them. Outside the viewport, the warship loomed closer now, its hull lights dimming and brightening in slow, deliberate patterns, ancient signals meant to announce authority rather than aggression. But Marcus had seen that posture before, right before cities fell. Celira turned away from the envoys and moved toward the narrow window, her back straight, her hands clasped behind her as if holding herself together by force alone. The silver lines along her skin pulsing faintly, responding to something unseen, something older than the station itself. The law you serve, she said quietly, was written after my people lost our homeworld. The envoys did not respond, but Marcus felt the shift in the room, as if even the air had leaned closer to listen. We were not conquered, Celira continued, her voice steady but heavy with buried grief. We were absorbed, folded into the concord and told it was mercy. Marcus watched her reflection in the glass, the way her eyes softened as memory pulled her inward, and something inside him stirred, recognition of that tone, the sound of someone remembering what they were never allowed to mourn. The Vathran line was spared extinction by agreeing to continuity, she said, to become symbols rather than survivors. Marcus finally understood, not fully but enough. The law was not just law, it was a leash disguised as protection. The envoys spoke then, their voices synchronized. History is acknowledged. Acknowledged? Marcus thought bitterly, like a footnote carved over bones. Celira turned back, her gaze locking on the floating sigil of authority. You want a declaration, she said, but you will not get obedience. Marcus stepped closer to her without thinking, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. Alien but not unfamiliar, like standing near a campfire on a cold night. Celira, he said softly, using her name for the first time. What happens if you refuse? Her jaw tightened. They take my holdings, dissolve my line, and assign me a ceremonial role until I die quietly. And the residents, Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. Reassigned, she replied. Scattered. The word scattered hit him harder than he expected. Memories of evacuations gone wrong, of families separated by orders issued from safe distances. The envoys shifted again, the hum of their armor deepening. A subtle warning. Your time is nearly spent, one said. Marcus felt something old and dangerous wake inside him, the part that had once stood between civilians and orbital fire, the part that refused to accept inevitability. There's something you're not telling us, he said, looking directly at the envoys. Law like this always has conditions. Celira glanced at him sharply, surprise flickering. The envoys paused, just long enough for Marcus to know he was right. Emergency continuity, one replied finally, requires mutual consent. Celira's breath caught, her golden eyes widening slightly, and Marcus felt the weight of that revelation settle over them both. Consent? Marcus echoed, his voice low. From both sides? Yes, the envoy confirmed. To prevent coercion claims. Marcus laughed quietly, shaking his head. The law pretending to be kind again. Celira turned to him fully now, her expression raw, unguarded, the regality stripped away, leaving only a woman trapped between duty and erasure. I will not ask this of you, she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. This is my fate, not yours. Marcus held her gaze, feeling something unfamiliar tug at his chest. Not desire, not obligation, but connection. Forged in shared defiance and quiet courage. I've lived under laws that didn't care whether I agreed, he said. I know what it's like to be told your life belongs to something bigger. He looked past her, at the envoys, at the hovering sigil, at the warship's shadow crawling across the station's hull. I won't let them decide this alone, he added. Celira reached out then, hesitated, and finally rested her hand against his forearm. Her touch warm, steady, grounding, and Marcus felt the station fade for a heartbeat. Felt only her presence and the unspoken understanding between them. You do not know what this bond would mean, she whispered. Vathran bonds are not symbolic, they are binding. Marcus met her eyes, unwavering. Neither are military oaths. The envoys' voices cut in, sharper now. Declaration window closing. Outside, distant thunder rolled through space as another vessel emerged from warp. Its signature unfamiliar. Its approach fast and unannounced. Celira's eyes snapped toward the viewport, fear flashing across her face for the first time. That ship, she said. It does not belong to the Concord. Marcus followed her gaze, his soldier's instincts screaming, tension coiling tight in his chest. Then, he said quietly, this just got a lot more complicated. Far beyond the station, the unknown warship adjusted its trajectory, weapons charging, and in that moment Marcus understood that whatever choice they made here would no longer be private. It would echo outward, pulling them into a battle far larger than law or rent, a collision of fate, bloodlines, and a rescue yet to be named. The unknown warship slid into full view beyond the viewport, its hull dark and angular, etched with symbols that did not belong to the Concord. Yet something about them made Celira freeze, her hand tightening on Marcus's arm as if the universe itself had whispered a name she had tried to forget. That ship? She breathed, the silver markings along her skin flaring brighter than before. It should not exist. The envoys reacted instantly, armor humming as defensive fields snapped into place. Their mirrored helmets turning toward the window, toward the threat that had just rewritten every calculation. Unregistered vessel. One intoned, its voice finally edged with tension. Stand by for enforcement escalation. Marcus felt the station tremble again. Not from fear but from proximity, from power held just barely in check, and he shifted his stance instinctively, placing himself half a step in front of Celira. Who are they? He asked quietly, eyes never leaving the warship as energy signatures bloomed across its surface like gathering storms. Celira swallowed, her composure fracturing under the weight of memory. Ghosts? She said. Or loyalists? Depending on who tells the story, the envoys turned back toward her, their attention sharp, predatory. Clarify. Sailira straightened then, something ancient settling into her posture, something regal and undeniable, and Marcus felt it, the shift, the way the room seemed to recognize her before the law ever did. My full designation, she said, voice resonant, layered with authority that had never been meant for rented corridors and unpaid debts, is Sailira Vathrin, first daughter of the Shattered Crown. The words hit like a shock wave. Marcus stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face before understanding followed, slow and heavy, the pieces sliding into place, her status, her solitude, the way the law circled her like a patient hunter. A princess, he murmured, not awe but clarity. The envoys reacted at once, the floating sigil flaring crimson, royal lineage confirmed. One announced, emergency protocol elevated. Outside, the unknown warship powered its weapons fully, brilliant arcs of energy crawling along its spine, and a broadcast pierced the station's systems, raw and unfiltered. Stand down, Concord. A voice thundered across every channel, deep and defiant. You are trespassing under the blood oath of Vathrin. Sailira closed her eyes for a heartbeat, pain and relief warring across her features. They found me, she whispered. Marcus felt the tension snap into something sharper, more dangerous. Found you to rescue you, he said, or drag you back into a war. She met his gaze, eyes shining. Both. The envoys raised their arms slightly, weapons priming. By law, all claims supersede insurgent declarations. The warship outside answered with a single warning pulse that rattled the station to its core. Lights flickering, gravity wavering, and Marcus felt the familiar edge of battle settle into his bones. This station won't survive a fight between warships, he said quickly. Not with civilians aboard. Sailira nodded, resolve hardening. Then the battlefield must change. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, she turned toward the envoys, her voice ringing with authority she had hidden even from herself. I invoke the right of binding, she declared. Under emergency continuity, the envoys froze, the sigil stuttering mid-rotation. Declaration requires mutual consent. One warned. Sailira looked at Marcus then, not pleading, not commanding, but honest in a way that stripped everything bare. If I do not bind now, she said, they will seize me, and the loyalists will burn half this sector trying to get me back. Marcus's heart pounded, the weight of the choice crushing and clear, and then something unexpected happened, something that twisted the moment into something else entirely. His wrist console activated on its own, dormant tech flaring to life beneath his skin. Alien glyphs and human code, weaving together as a long-buried identifier broadcast into the room. The envoys recoiled, armor flaring. Impossible, one said, its voice breaking for the first time. Human designation carries crown key authorization. Sailira stared at Marcus, shock stealing her breath. What did you just do? Marcus looked down at his own arm, at the glowing mark that hadn't existed seconds ago. Memories flooding back in fragments, classified missions, sealed orders, a final extraction he had never fully remembered. I think, he said slowly, I was never just a refugee. The warship outside shifted position, its weapons lowering slightly as new data streamed in. Crown key confirmed, the broadcast voice said, suddenly reverent. Protector class asset located. Sailira took a step toward Marcus, her hands trembling. The crown key was lost with my mother, she whispered. It was bonded to the one sworn to guard the royal bloodline. Marcus met her gaze, the truth settling like gravity, heavy and undeniable. Then I guess, he said quietly, the law erased me better than I thought. The envoys backed away now, their authority shaken, calculations unraveling in real time. Binding conditions altered. One announced, Protector presence escalates continuity. Sailira reached for Marcus's hand, their fingers intertwining as silver light wrapped around them both. Ancient systems awakening, recognizing a bond older than Concord law. I did not choose you, she said softly, emotion breaking through her strength. But fate did. Marcus squeezed her hand. Steady, grounded. Then let's make sure fate doesn't get everyone killed. Outside, the Loyalist warship aligned itself between the station and the Concorde vessel. Shields flaring, battle lines drawn, and in that moment the universe shifted. What had begun as unpaid rent and quiet defiance had revealed a hidden princess, a forgotten protector, and a bond that could ignite a war or end one. And as weapons powered and law recalculated, destiny tightened its grip, preparing to demand its price. The station groaned as opposing gravitic fields pressed against each other. Concorde authority on one side, Loyalist defiance on the other, and Marcus felt the vibration crawl up through the soles of his boots and settle into his spine like a warning remembered too late. The envoys retreated toward the doorway, their confidence replaced by rapid recalculations, armor lights flickering as data poured in faster than law could digest. Sector escalation detected. One announced, voice clipped, multiple fleets responding. Celira's breath caught, her grip tightening around Marcus's hand, and he felt the tremor there. Not fear for herself, but for everyone trapped inside this fragile shell of metal and hope. How many? She asked quietly. For Concorde task groups, the envoy replied, and at least 3 non-aligned forces. Marcus closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Seeing it clearly, alliances shifting, old grudges waking. Every power in the region smelling blood in the vacuum. This isn't about you anymore, he said, opening his eyes. This is becoming a war trigger. Celira nodded, pain etched into her expression. The Vathran crown was designed to be. Outside, the Loyalist warship broadcast again. Its voice carried on every frequency, urgent and fierce. All vessels, be advised, the princess lives. The words rippled outward like a shockwave, and Marcus felt the weight of them. The way a single truth could fracture decades of imposed order. The Concorde warship responded instantly, its signal cold and absolute. By authority of galactic law, all claims to royal succession are suspended. Celira laughed softly, a sound edged with bitterness. They can suspend titles, she said. Not belief. The station lights dimmed as power was rerouted to shields, and Marcus felt the old clarity settle in. The kind that came only when survival narrowed to seconds and choices mattered more than rules. We need to move, he said. This room is a liability. The envoys hesitated, then stepped aside, forced by protocol and uncertainty, and Celira guided Marcus into the corridor. Her presence parting residents instinctively, whispers spreading like wildfire through the ring. Princess, protector, or Marcus caught fragments as they passed. Fear blooming in every species, every face, and with it something else, hope dangerous and contagious. At the central junction, the station commander appeared on the holoprojector, eyes wide, scales dulled with stress. You've brought annihilation to my station, the commander hissed. Celira met the gaze without flinching. I've brought truth, she replied. The annihilation is optional. Another tremor shook the station, sharper this time, weapons discharging somewhere far beyond hull plating. The first exchange, restrained but unmistakable. Marcus felt it like a punch to the chest the moment diplomacy died. They've fired warning shots, he said. Next comes escalation. As if summoned by his words, a new signal burst across the network. Ancient encryption riding on modern carriers, and Celira froze, recognition slamming into her. That code, she whispered. It's my mother's. Marcus's wrist flared again, responding without conscious command. Unlocking layers he hadn't known existed, images flooding his mind. A burning throne world, a child carried through smoke, a vow spoken in blood and silence. The signal resolved into a message, fragmented but clear enough. To all free systems, the voice said, worn yet unbroken. The crown endures. Across the stars, Marcus knew people were listening. Systems that had bent to Concorde law out of exhaustion rather than loyalty. Worlds that remembered promises broken. This changes everything, he said, awe and dread intertwined. Yes, Celira replied. tears bright in her eyes. And it condemns us. The station commander's image flickered, replaced by emergency feeds. Riots beginning on distant platforms, patrols defecting, law enforcement units standing down as uncertainty spread faster than order ever could. The Concord envoy's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and furious. Protector-class human, it said, by engaging Crown Key authority, you have violated interstellar statute. Marcus smiled grimly. Story of my life. Another blast rocked the station. Closer now, alarms shifting from ceremonial to panicked, gravity fluctuating, civilians screaming as systems strained. Celira grabbed Marcus's face, forcing him to meet her eyes, desperation and resolve colliding there. If this continues, she said, millions will die. Marcus felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders, heavier than any rank he'd worn. Then we changed the board, he replied. He accessed the Crown Key fully for the first time, not as a forgotten asset but as a choice, projecting a signal that cut through the noise, overriding civilian channels and military alike. To all forces, Marcus said, his voice steady, carried by ancient authority and human defiance. This station is neutral ground. For a heartbeat, the galaxies seemed to pause. Any vessel that fires again, he continued, declares war on the crown and its protector. Celira watched him, fear giving way to something like pride. Outside, weapons powered down one by one, not from obedience but hesitation, and Marcus knew that hesitation was temporary. Because now the galaxy knew the princess lived. The protector had returned, and law was no longer unquestioned. And when hesitation ended, the battle that followed would decide not just their fate, but the shape of power itself among the stars. The silence that followed Marcus's declaration was vast and fragile, stretched across light seconds of space and millions of listening minds, and he could feel it trembling, waiting to shatter. Within the station corridors, people had stopped running, stopped shouting, as if instinct itself had leaned closer to hear whether the universe would breathe again or break. Celira stood beside Marcus, her fingers still wrapped around his hand, silver light pulsing in slow, steady rhythms along her skin. Syncing now with the glow on his wrist, two ancient systems recognizing one another after lifetimes of separation. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, emotion thick in her voice. Marcus didn't look away from the tactical projections flooding the air around them. Fleets hovering at the edge of engagement ranges, commanders arguing, politicians panicking, soldiers waiting. Yes, he replied softly. I did. The Concord envoy hovered several steps back now, its authority fractured, voice lower, almost uncertain. Protector-class asset, escalation risk exceeds acceptable thresholds. Marcus turned then, meeting the mirrored visor with eyes that had seen burning cities and dying friends. So does your grip on the galaxy. Outside, the loyalist warship repositioned, broadcasting defensive grids instead of weapons fire, its captain's voice cutting through the noise, respectful and fierce. Princess Celira, the voice said, we stand ready to extract you. Celira closed her eyes, pain flickering across her face. If I leave, she whispered, they will follow. And if you stay, Marcus said gently, they'll use you as bait. She looked at him then, really looked not as protector or soldier or symbol, but as the man who had stepped between her and annihilation without hesitation. All my life, she said, voice trembling, I have been told my existence was a problem to be managed. Marcus felt his chest tighten, the words striking deeper than any battlefield wound. And all my life, she continued, others decided what I was worth. He squeezed her hand, grounding her, grounding himself. Not this time. The station commander reappeared in the hollow field, fear etched deep into their features. We are losing containment, they said. Civilian evacuation pods are launching without authorization. Marcus nodded once, already knowing panic always outran order. Open a corridor, he said. Route them through the loyalist shield envelope. The envoy snapped its head toward him. You cannot command. I just did, Marcus replied, his wrist flaring brighter. Crown key authority cascading through systems long thought dormant. Across the sector, ancient relay nodes awakened, their lights blinking on for the first time in generations, spreading the signal farther than Concord had ever allowed. Celira felt it, gasped softly. The Crown network. She breathed. My mother hit it. She hit hope, Marcus said. The Concord Warships' weapons powered up again. Slowly, deliberately, and Marcus knew what that meant. Fear giving way to resolve on the other side. They're going to make an example, he said quietly. Celira stepped forward then, releasing his hand and moving into the center of the corridor. Her posture shifting, regality blooming fully now, undeniable, radiant. Then let it be me, she said, her voice carrying. Marcus's heart lurched. Celira. She turned back to him, tears streaking silver down her cheeks. If I run, she said, this never ends. Before he could stop her, she raised her hands and the silver markings along her skin blazed like starlight, broadcasting her presence openly, unmistakably. I am Celira Vathrin. Her voice rang across every channel. Princess of a broken people, and I am done hiding. Across space, reactions exploded, loyalist ships answering with flares of light, Concord commanders shouting conflicting orders, neutral systems leaning closer. Marcus felt panic surge through him, raw and terrifying, not for the galaxy, but for her. This makes you a target, he said, his voice breaking despite himself. She smiled at him then, soft and fierce. I have always been one. The Concord warship locked targeting solutions, energy building toward a decisive strike, and Marcus moved without thinking, stepping in front of Celira, spreading his arms as if his body alone could shield a station. A people, a future. I swore an oath, he said, his voice echoing through the Crown network. Long before I remembered it. His wrist burned now, power surging through him, ancient safeguards activating, drawing on systems meant for moments exactly like this. To protect the Crown, he continued, even from itself. The Loyalist warship surged forward, shields flaring, intercepting the Concord firing arc, space itself seeming to bend under the strain. Weapons discharged, light tearing through the void. Alarms screaming as the station shook violently, bulkheads groaning, lives hanging in the balance. Marcus felt the cost then, the terrible clarity of it, every choice carving scars into the universe. Celira pressed her forehead against his back, her voice barely audible. If we survive this, she whispered, there will be no going back. Marcus closed his eyes, breath steady, heart breaking and blazing all at once. Good, he said, because as battle erupted around them and the galaxy tipped toward chaos or rebirth, Marcus knew one truth with absolute certainty. He would not let her stand alone, not against law, not against fleets, not against fate itself. The explosion never came. Instead, there was a blinding surge of light, not violent but vast, rolling outward like a sunrise tearing through the dark, and Marcus felt it pass through him rather than over him. Ancient systems completing a circuit long broken. Across space, weapons froze mid-charge, targeting solutions collapsed into static, and the Concord warship's forward arrays dimmed as if power itself had decided to listen. Silence returned, but this time it was different. Not fragile, not fearful, but full. Marcus opened his eyes and realized he was no longer standing in a corridor. Around him the air shimmered with layered projections, stars unfolding like pages, Crown Network relays blazing to life one after another, revealing a web of forgotten promises stretching across the galaxy. Celira stood beside him, her silver markings no longer flaring but steady, luminous, whole. And for the first time since he had met her, she looked unburdened. The Concord envoy knelt not from command, but because its systems could no longer deny what stood before it. Crown continuity confirmed, it said quietly, stripped of arrogance. Protector and sovereign unified. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for most of his life. Outside the station, fleets held position, weapons powered down not by fear but by understanding, by the sudden realization that the rules they had lived under were never the only ones. The loyalist warship broadcast again, its voice no longer fierce but reverent. The crown stands. Across distant worlds, people felt it. Miners paused in dark tunnels. Farmers looked up from alien soil. Soldiers lowered rifles mid-march, because something ancient and patient had finally answered back. Celira turned to Marcus then, eyes shining, and rested her forehead against his. The gesture intimate and powerful all at once. "You remembered me," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You reminded me who I was." Memory settled fully now, no longer fragments, no longer pain, but purpose. A vow spoken over a dying queen. A child pressed into his arms. A promise to vanish so the crown could endure without being hunted. "I was meant to be forgotten," Marcus said softly. "Yes," Celira replied, smiling through tears. "And meant to return." The station stabilized, gravity smoothing. Alarms fading. Civilians emerging cautiously into corridors filled with light instead of fear. Whispers turning into hope. The station commander approached slowly, all replacing anger. "What happens now?" Celira stepped forward, her voice carrying warmth rather than command. "Now," she said, "we rebuild trust before borders." She looked out toward the stars, toward Concord space and beyond. "There will be councils," she continued. "Not tribunals, there will be laws." Her gaze softened as she glanced back at Marcus. But never again laws without choice. The Concord warship withdrew first, not defeated, but changed, its withdrawal broadcast across every channel as a quiet admission that authority could evolve. The Loyalist fleet followed, forming a protective arc rather than a spear, guardians instead of rebels. When the stars finally settled back into ordinary motion, Marcus felt the weight lift from his shoulders, replaced not by peace, but by belonging. Celira took his hand, openly now, without fear of witnesses or consequences. "I once ruled corridors and leases," she said gently, "hiding from the galaxy. And I once hid from myself," Marcus replied. They shared a quiet laugh, soft and human and alien all at once. "Stay," she said, "not as an order, not as law, but as a choice." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I never planned on leaving." Above them, the station's lights warmed, reflecting off silver and steel, off scars and futures. What began as unpaid rent had become a rescue. What began as law had become destiny. What began with a forgotten human had become the return of a crown. And as Marcus Hale, soldier once erased, protector reborn, stood beside an alien princess who chose her people over fear, the galaxy quietly accepted a new truth, that fate could be challenged, that law could be rewritten, and that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance, kindness, and courage were enough to change the stars forever.